welcome to So San Francisco, Internationally Black, where we visit with artists who are creating around the world. And this time, we're going to China. Our guest today is Cici Vasquez, a voiceover actor, visual artist, teacher, and the creator and host of The Rotten Girl's Guide to Sexual Tropes, a podcast that dissects human sexuality from the perspectives of women living with autism. Cici has lived in China for almost 10 years, and today we will be chatting about a variety of somewhat controversial topics, including a recent Chinese production of A Raisin in the Sun and the debate about cultural appropriation. So, sit back and enjoy So San Francisco, Internationally Black with Cici Vasquez. We are here today with Cici Vasquez, who is the host, the creator of the podcast, The Rotten Girl's Guide to Sexual Tropes. A former resident of China. I'm just going to start by asking, like, how did you end up in China? What led you to China? How?
Um, well, this was like shortly after the recession, the big recession, the last big recession in the US. And there was not that many jobs for my skill set. I'd been recently diagnosed with autism, and I was getting tired of people telling me what I could not do and who I could not be. And somebody just told me that I would never be an adventurer or travel. And it was just kind of like a big old, like, well, yeah, see what I do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no deep thought or consideration. I was like, this is the weirdest place or scariest place to me right now. So that's where I'm going.
That's it.
And it works out really well.
Yeah, it sounds like it did. How did you, like, when you made that decision, or when you began to have those ideas, like, what were some of the hoops one goes through? Did you just, like, did you have to get a visa to go live in China, or do you just, like, get a ticket and fly over there? Like, how did you take that step?
It, I mean, I think it's quite different now. I'm not totally sure because I don't need a visa at the moment, and all my recent visas have been done in China. But it was a little complicated, having to do the passport. Mostly because I'm from Puerto Rico, so I had to go back to Puerto Rico to get my passport originally. Uh, but after that, China has some pretty unique requirements that other countries don't. You cannot apply directly to China. You have to send it to one of, I think it's five embassies here in the United States, and they're each per a region. So you have to make sure it's the right one. Actual visa, it used to, I don't know, right now with COVID and everything, it used to be quite easy to get it. And there were a bunch of different ones, you could get for 1 month to travel, and you can go all the way up to a 10-year free entry visa to travel as much as you want, student visas and business visas. Um, and I guess the most of your listeners would be interested in would be the entertainment visa, which is pretty difficult to get, and only
Oh.
has it.
You say nobody has it, or you have it?
No,
Sorry.
almost nobody had it.
Almost nobody has it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What makes it so difficult to get? What are the requirements?
To be able to get an actual visa, like for entertainment work, for acting, you have to be already on a production. You have to have your contract and everything else, and you have to be working for a specific amount of
Like
time.
equity.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
like, you
Wow.
have to basically just be going there for like 2 weeks, a month to shoot your shot and then get out. So
Yeah.
if you are a working actor who wants to stay in China, that's not a visa that you can actually use, and there's no
Mm,
options for making it a usable visa.
mm,
Oh.
Most actors in China are actually on a student visa or a business visa.
Mm.
yeah. It's
Because by necessity, if you're doing any kind of entertainment work, you are on an illegal visa. That's just how it's made, how it is there.
So if you're not on an entertainment visa,
Mhm.
you can't accept jobs that are entertainment related.
you're working under the table. You're working as an illegal alien.
Yeah.
Like all the stuff that, people like to talk smack about and complain about here in the
You're
US,
undocumented.
Hmm.
that's exactly what's up. That's
Yeah.
exactly how Americans live in China. Like the majority of the teachers, by the way, do not have a teaching visa. They usually also are on a student visa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So tell us about your experience. How did you find your feet in China?
I was working maybe uh sorry, how do I phrase that? Underemployed as a freelance writer. So when I decided that I was going to go to China, I realized that I needed to have some kind of creative job that was going to let me travel and still make money. And I settled on writing. So I was doing like articles about travel and like my experience there, as well as autism, of course. So that kind of got me there. But once I was there, I had no idea what I was going to do. As I started studying Chinese, I ran into some people who really liked my voice. My voice was always something that people kept bringing up, that they complimented. They liked my accent, my pronunciation. Um,
Mhm.
and people just started bringing me jobs. So, like, as long as I kept a positive attitude, I'd be offered a teaching job. Um, the teaching is not like what we have here in the US, it's really performance.
Hmm.
So it's teaching as acting or
Oh.
acting as teaching.
Mm.
Yeah. So basically, you are pretending that you are a teacher. Okay. So basically, what will happen, and if you are good at it, if you can just like come up with things on the ball, you will get a lot more opportunity. Like when I left China, I was making $50 an hour. And this was like as just a teacher, not doing anything extra, not voiceover work, just teaching like ESL. Uh, so basically, you will go to the school, they're going to hand you like a book and not going to tell you anything about what you're supposed to do. And you're going to be sent into this room with like any number of kids. It could be 2, it could be 20. You have no idea. And then when you get in there, there's going to be a ton of parents. They're going to be watching you on camera, or they could be in the back of the room. And you have to
Oh.
perform. You have to be happy. You have to be outgoing. You have to be bright. You have to say hello to everybody, and you have to be ready to move. Uh, so it's more like maybe like hosting an event than being a teacher.
Yeah. And
Wow.
when
So like you can show up and you can be like, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing today, and they'll be like, today you have 10 5-year olds and they want to play a game with the ball, and we don't have any idea what the game is, and but these are the keywords that you have to use today, and you have to be like right there, improv, figure it out in like 2 minutes, that's it.
wow.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah, and if you can do that, I mean, like, yeah, you're gonna have a great career.
I was going to say we met on the Theater Folks of Color site. There was an NPR, you've seen the NPR coverage of a Chinese production of A Raisin in the Sun. And they touched on the fact that in China, makeup is often used to portray a character. That was one of the aspects of the article. That it wasn't what we would call blackface, but they darkened their skin with makeup and put cornrows in their hair in order to mark it as an African American story. So I came onto the page at the time. I can't remember the original poster was posting uh, a protest to the article itself that NPR should not even be reporting on this unless they had talked to enough Black people, first of all, to. I mean, it was to me. It was just it's the kind of thing I go. Ah. It was just, and even the thing that got me was he demanded an apology from the writer, who's Emily Fain. thing. I thought it was a really well thought out article. She spoke to
Mhm.
the African American professor who had advised the production. I tried to get him on. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. Leave me alone about that. But yeah, so there was a culture. The word cultural appropriation, the idea of cultural appropriation, was raised, and then someone even brought up Arthur Miller's production, Death of a
With
Salesman,
all the
and
blonde
they did
wigs. Yeah.
whiteface,
Yeah.
and she was appalled. But I read an article that back then said that Arthur Miller had judged Chinese productions and cultures by uh, his own limitations.
Yeah, and I think in the
Right.
article it said that so they had the blonde wigs and Arthur Miller, insisted that they got rid of them, and
Yes.
then when they put on the play for the Chinese audience was confused. They're like, what is this? Where is this? Because
Yeah, where is it
the
happening?
contextually, yeah, the
This
way
doesn't
the
look like it.
context,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, to where
Mhm.
this is happening and who these people are, in terms of their nationality or their, being
Why
American,
is he a
Chinese
salesman and why is he sad? Yeah. Oh, it's an American. Got it. The white people. Okay, I got it.
It's just a visual shorthand, like
Mhm.
this
Right.
is not happening in China. These are not Chinese people. Of course, the
Right.
actors are Chinese people, so they need some little thing to help them kind of know what's happening, give them context.
Yes, so a lack of understanding of what's typical in China.
Yeah, so there's this person who posted on Theater Folks of Color
Yes.
about how upset they are and how the NPR was wrong for writing about this, and they should have, basically called this production out, right, for cultural
Yeah.
appropriation. And what did you, Idris and Cici, what did you all say in this
So he
conversation?
demanded that NPR give an apology to the black people, to
The
the black
black
people,
people,
to the black
God.
world.
the,
Yes.
the black world. That's interesting.
But
Yeah.
CC came on and said, I worked in China. And I was like, now we all need to shut up. And listen.
Oh yeah. So I will tell you, I am always getting in trouble for my views about race.
Hey.
I will fight everybody. And just to be totally clear to any of your viewers, I am not black appearing. I am mixed race and I look pretty light skinned, Latina, but I do
Latinx.
have black heritage.
Yes.
Nobody can tell, but apparently I've been told
Yeah.
by African Americans in the US that I'm not allowed to claim that heritage because I'm also Latina. I have to choose between being Latina and being black. And that seems
They
to be
said
like a
that to
really,
Kamala Harris too.
yeah, that seems to be a really popular point of view in the US. I was literally just on Instagram watching a video of a girl dancing to African music, and an African American woman was like super angry and saying like, they're stealing everything from us. And I'm like, are you African? Like, what country is this dance from?
Yeah.
Like, how does this have to do with you?
Yeah,
and
who's stealing
she's all
anything
like,
from you? What?
like, do you even know like anything? Like, this
You
white
even
girl
know
knows
this
more
art,
about
do
this
you know
culture
this
than
people?
you do.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
African
yeah.
music belongs to the world.
Yeah.
Any music that's put out in the public, in a way, is meant to be enjoyed by everyone.
Yeah, and well, it's so
I
interesting. I
agree.
mean, it reminds me of the whole Adele controversy when she had that photo in the Jamaican flag, but she was talking about Notting Hill Carnival. She had a Jamaican flag
Which
bikini.
everyone in London does.
Yeah,
When they go to the
she was
Notting
talking
Hill
about going to the
Carnival.
Notting Hill Carnival.
People braid up
Yes.
their hair.
And Americans, yeah, I mean, I
That's
had
just a
some friends.
celebration.
Yeah, and the point of the celebration is
Mhm.
that it is something that's being shared with the world. It's not
And
a
it's centralizing. It's
celebration.
centralizing Caribbean culture.
Yeah.
It centralizes it.
Mhm.
The
Well, listen.
expectation is that you show up in your Caribbean best. It's
Mhm.
not. There's nothing that's ever been on the Notting Hill Carnival
Yeah.
that says. If
Well,
you're white,
like
white.
I grew up in Puerto Rico and like I grew up with all of those Jamaican dance hall style dances. We were twerking in middle school, and then I got here to the US and I'm like, oh, so I'm not allowed to do that because it belongs to because I'm not dark enough. I'm gonna have to tell my dad I'm not black. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, like this was my first thought when I was reading these people like being so angry about this article. It's like there are different definitions of racism around the world. And don't get me wrong, China absolutely has racism. It definitely has colorism and it has all kinds of problems. But like, you cannot engage in, you know, cultural hegemony and like force other countries to acquiesce to like this particular region's vision of the world. That's exactly the same thing that caused our current issue with like white supremacy and like what did they call it? The something doctrine.
Oh, the well,
Oh,
there's the white man's burden. There's the manifest destiny.
That's the one. Manifest destiny.
The doctrine. I know what you're talking. The doctrine of discovery.
Yeah, basically just like you know, we decide what's acceptable. We decide what the standard is, and everybody is forced to kind of like give into that, and like you know.
Well, here's the thing. I'll defend my people. I'll defend the African American. There's a thing like, you know, there's a far difference to me from Miles Davis not being allowed to be on the cover of an album, because to me that's kind of where this begins. Like, if we grow up and we don't understand that jazz has a connection to African American people and heritage, and even you know, take that connection back to Africa, we don't understand the art form completely, right?
Yeah.
So I would say in that context, but that's a far different cry to me than a play like Raisin in the Sun, which has been one, is probably in public domain by now, which is understood on a different level, which is a piece of fiction, which is a piece of fiction meant to be mimicry. It's meant to be. You are not, how many African, what's the guy's name? Assegai? How many Nigerians have played Assegai?
Me. but yeah, not that many.
Not that many.
Yeah.
And Assegai himself is not a true Nigerian character. Lorraine Hansberry.
Well, the name, it's not a Nigerian.
He's an amalgam. Yeah, it's not a Nigerian name.
Assegai is not a Nigerian.
It's an amalgamation of some people she knew, a little sprinkling in there from some of her act, like Wally Shaik or somebody told her to write this part in. So it's a what do you call those when you? It's a composite character.
A composite, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not meant to be this. She was writing a play.
I guess one that is, it's interesting. I think about, you know, Raisin in the Sun is, you know, a classic. It's something that is, you know, but it also is, you know, because I think the article did this, and I think, okay, I'm comparing it to something like Shakespeare, for example, or even that are not necessarily rooted in, well, they're rooted in a culture because he was writing in a particular time for particular people, or at least a particular, you know, society. But, you know, Raisin in the Sun is specifically about the African American experience, as opposed to Twelfth Night, which is, you know, not at least culturally specific in the way that we experience culture today. So there's some difference there, and but I am curious, where that
where the conversation,
where the line is, right? Or where, like where do the demarcations exist, and where do they make sense and where do they not?
Well, I think when one sets out to prescribe, then you get into trouble, because Cici, you can remember some of the ways the conversation went was to talk.
Oh yeah, we got slammed.
What were the rebuttals?
Well, we got some good ones in there.
The complaints,
because it was like, you know, the reference to Cardi B and Little Kim, Nicki Minaj.
And what was that reference?
Yeah. How they've always taken Asian culture and dressed up. Beyonce, her whole Asian turn, where she was a geisha, right?
Well, like that whole conversation about appropriation versus appreciation is happening in a really extremist moment. Like we can't even define that accurately. Like we have lost sight of what appreciation even means, you know, like
so
literally.
You brought up something really cool though about how how the Chinese are not complaining about Nicki Minaj.
Oh no, that's also like what I noticed in that dance video that I was just telling you. Like, you know, the actual African people who had commented on the video were all like, "Yay, we love seeing our culture shared and exported." This is like the same kind of view about that Latinos have about Latin dance, Latin music. You know, we're taking over the world. That's how we
Yeah.
see it. It's
Yeah.
seen as like we're not just sharing our culture, we are sharing, we are like sucking
Dominating.
up some of
I,
your toxic
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is, I think what culture is and what culture does. It's meant to
Mhm.
spread. It's meant to, like, so many of the things, I mean, that we consider, there was this exhibit at the DM Museum here in San Francisco recently, and it was of Navajo blankets, right? And we look at these blankets and we go, oh, these are like the Navajo people's cultural heritage. But if you look at the exhibit and if you look at the history of these blankets, what we see today as Navajo blankets, they were also inspired by the Navajo people's interactions with Europeans. And so some of the textiles they use and the fabrics, the techniques were incorporating some of the things that they were also encountering in these new interactions. And for me, one of the things that reminded me of was the fact that, like, culture is not static. It never has been.
Yeah.
No culture is static.
Yeah.
Every things that we now consider, belonging to one country or one people, have
Hybridity.
over millennia have morphed and have taken in so many influences, and that's how
Yep.
human society or human
Yeah.
consciousness continues to evolve. And putting these walls around things is actually, I think, quite regressive, quite anti-life.
Othering.
It's, yeah.
It's also lacks research and knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
because one of the things when I studied African arts, the Awam Ankpa has a really wonderful book. I can't think of the title right now, but he only has a few, and you should read all of them. But the book begins by talking about the hybridity of of Nigeria, of being born into a culture that was already so ethnically diverse
Mhm.
that to call oneself an Igbo or Yoruba was to talk really about a hybridity already. That he and he's neither. So he comes from a village in Calabar, but he just talked about the history of Nigeria. And you begin to see that people came from all over, and people came from far away places to really make up what we call uh, an Igbo or a Calabar or
Nigeria
yeah,
or
or
Europe.
a
Yeah.
Nigerian, even
Yeah.
more, to lump it all in the
Yeah,
same.
I mean, yeah, like, what does Nigerian mean? It's a country with over 200 ethnic groups and dialects and languages. It's,
Mhm.
these, but to say some, there's always been this mixing, and always, and
Yeah,
even these lines that we've created now to demarcate certain nationalities or tribes are relatively new creations. They're not like things that are set in stone or that have even existed for centuries. It's all shifting, and so the the need to hold on to this fixed identity
well,
or this fixed
identity
idea
shifts too, and identity
is,
shifts in so many
yeah,
ways.
is
There's your
almost,
identity,
I
then
think.
there's the one that's put on you, then there's then there's the
Hmm.
one you grow into. Like, but the so back going back to the raisin conversation on the on the Facebook, you also talked about just the controversy of doing a show like a Raisin in the Sun, and
Mhm.
circling back to those visa issues,
Mm.
Uh-huh.
that there weren't African American artists that they were taking jobs from necessarily that could have been put in
Mhm.
those roles. Correct? You mentioned that.
Yeah, so you know, first I want to say, like, agreeing with what you guys were saying earlier, I think like art is kind of like, a fire basically. If there's no oxygen, there's no exchange of oxygen, there's no hot, there's no cold, there's no fire, there's nothing. Everything's going out.
Ah, I like
And
that.
it's smothered. So
Mhm.
yeah, here's the thing about China. If you are an illegal alien, you are undocumented, because that is what you will be as an artist working in China. Um, you are not allowed to work on these kind of performances, especially in Beijing, which is the center of the country. It's where the seat of the government is. How are you going to have Black people on nebulous visas, not knowing like who is legal, who can do what, and expose them to political sanctions, to being deported, to being fined, to being jailed to participate in this show? The only way that they could participate would be to do it on a volunteer basis, and that's only if they are not doing any other kind of work, getting any money from any other source, because they will be examined so deeply.
Hmm.
And even the slightest bit of controversy, that will be enough for them to be removed. If this was like a small play happening at somebody's university, or somewhere in one of the smaller cities or villages, you can get away with, somebody will bribe an official and it's not going to be a big deal, but it's not going to like be such a huge thing on social media. It's not going to be advertised. But to do this in the center of Beijing, there's no way. It's not going to happen. It's not.
Yeah, it was also part of the university curriculum this
Hmm.
semester. Students were studying it as it was going up.
Hmm.
And I think it offered probably more opportunities for Black thought, Black life, and Black politics in China
Hmm.
than
Yeah.
yeah,
Then if they
probably
had
anything
done,
else that was running
yeah.
right then.
If they'd st- if then if they'd stayed in their own lane.
Yeah. Than if they stayed in their own lane.
Yeah, then everyone stays in their own lane and no one understands anyone else. And you know, was there anyone in that conversation on Facebook, which is the seventh circle of hell for any kind of conversation? But was there anyone who sort of saw your perspective, who was like, "Oh, okay, now I see what you're saying," or was it did people stick to their guns when you chimed in, Cici?
I don't think there were. Maybe like one or two. I think two people,
There was
Aegis and one
one.
other person, reached
There
out
was
to
one
me.
other woman, and I believe she was a professor who taught Chinese theater or something. She had some expertise in. She
Mhm.
started to speak on the history of performing. Do you remember this? And she talked about. She was the one who brought up Arthur Miller.
It's a
What
mess.
is where does this come from? This need or this um, policing of culture,
I think it comes
cultural
from
like
actual theft.
where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from actual theft.
Actual what? Sorry, can you go back?
Actual theft.
It comes from
Like
actual
out of
theft.
colonialism. Like
Okay.
we're aware, even if we're not African, even as a non-African, walking into the British Museum
Hmm.
was angering because
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
had everybody's shit in there. They had
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
they had Iranian shit, they had African, they had everybody's stuff. And I think that when you go back to African American culture, a lot of things were stolen from us. Like we, as from our ancestors. So whoever is the ancestor who built the black man who built the White House, right? That those
Hmm.
sort of things are not talked about. So credit isn't given. So no
Hmm.
one imagines that a black person can be an architect and build a building when there's this history, this long history. There goes my life.
Speaking of speaking of architects, you better get one to design your
Oh
space.
my God.
Your city is falling apart.
Yes. So,
Boy.
but there's a history of theft of
Hmm.
Miles Davis not being on the cover for a really deliberate reason, of
Hmm.
Prince having to write slave on the side of his cheek. Like there's a history of unfair representation. I think it
Hmm.
comes from that, but it becomes confused when you try to be prescriptive. I think.
Hmm.
I
I think I disagree with you a little bit.
Okay, come on.
Not necessarily specific to African Americans, but I feel, especially in the U.S., everybody's so disassociated from their culture. Like nobody knows where they're from. Well, white people
Mhm.
do, but like everybody else, nobody knows where they're from. Nobody knows their history. Nobody knows what happened or how they got there. You can talk to Black people, Latino people, Native American people, even a lot of Asian people, and their histories, their cultures were completely erased. Um, so talking to a lot of people, when I go with certain people of these groups, certain groups that have the awareness of what was stolen from them, specifically like Native American people, indigenous people.
Mhm.
um, I feel like they feel it more deeply. But for example, Latinos and Asian peoples, especially, I'll speak for those two groups because I know them better. But like, I don't feel that same kind of anger or that same kind of hurt or feeling like, something's been taken away from me. Um, and I don't know how deeply that feeling, occurs to African American people. I would feel like, uh, well, my dad is Afro Latino. I don't know if I'm allowed to claim that. I've been told that
Right.
I'm not.
Claim whatever you
But
want
Tell you what to claim or
to.
not to
You're
claim.
entitled to number one. If you're
you know
gonna
how
be
it goes.
African American, you're gonna be black. Black to me is don't let nobody tell you what black is.
I've
Black
mentioned
ain't.
this to you several times,
I'm gonna
because
just move
I
my
feel
thing.
that I am allowed to claim the African diaspora, but I'm not allowed to
Absolutely.
claim blackness in any way. But
There's no
like,
separation though. What's the
yeah,
Yeah,
but
what is
there
the difference? Yeah,
is,
what's the
there
difference?
is, like at least in Puerto Rico,
oh,
Mm.
where
because of
I was
skin tone.
educated. No, 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 no. In
Oh,
Puerto Rico, at least in my school, I was educated on my history.
That is
I knew what had happened to us. I knew how it had happened. Like, maybe I just had good teachers because my teachers were all kind of socialist. But like, they made a point of telling the real history, of telling us like what was stolen from us and
yeah.
what we didn't have. And just by the nature of Puerto Rico, and like you were talking about, Nigeria, that it's so many different cultures and so mixed. Already Puerto Rico is like that. It's already so mixed, like I can sit there and tell you specific words that came from African culture and speak those words of that language, which is called Bembe. um, and I don't know anything else about it, but I know those words and I know where they come from. And I feel like African Americans in the US don't have that. So
Mm.
there's kind of like, you either become angry at everything all the time,
Panic. Panic.
or you're not angry about anything because there's not, you don't know where to focus.
Yeah. I think that's an evolvement also because well, yeah, you don't know where to focus. I would agree with you. I would agree with you. I think that there's been a time when if a Puerto Rican person didn't claim their African blackness,
Mm-hmm.
there was things, that was perceived as bad.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're saying that when you do try to claim it, people are like, no, you're not black enough. And I think a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
fall into that, even myself, right? I've been
Mm-hmm.
told I'm not black enough
Mm-hmm.
just because of a viewpoint I may have held or who I was, you know, who I had as a dinner date.
Yeah. I mean, people are people. Like, does it matter if somebody's black? I mean,
Yeah, does it really? It doesn't really.
or white or
So
brown or
it
just
just
like,
comes up in a debate to distract from what could
mm-hmm.
possibly be something real being talked about. Probably that's how I.
Yeah.
That's
It's
how I
always used
think it
as a
invoked.
weapon,
Yeah,
especially.
yeah.
Like,
It gets
like
invoked to shut down dissent in
who
a
was
way.
that politician just this week that was caught with the burner account with the fake black gay man? Did you guys
What?
hear about that?
Oh, I did hear about that. It was
I can't
some
remember the name.
yeah,
It was a
somebody like tried to take
Republican.
down and they would go and a black gay man, as a black gay man, I say this.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
see, I
I love that. I mean,
I do
I don't know
too
too much about the
because
persons,
you
but I
need
love
to
the
stop
idea of that.
believing everything. It,
uh-huh.
people are so reactionary. That's
Yeah.
why you can do that.
Well, there
Yeah.
was that.
Because
We're also
people are trying to protect so much and they
mm,
can't focus on anything, that they end up like with like, oh my god, everything is a problem, everything, and then they freak
yeah,
out about anything, and then here come these people who are absolutely willing to take advantage of this situation. And
yeah.
I've
Mhm.
noticed this in several different ways. I've actually posted this a bunch of times on my Facebook account. I think I mentioned it to you, and it's definitely come up in my podcast. Like, I have some friends who are trans, and like, and other friends who work in the education industry. Um, And one thing that we've been noticing was a lot of fake Latinos that turn into fake Black people, specifically white women who will pretend to be Latina, and then after a while they pretend that they're Black.
That was that
And
woman who was
like,
working at Howard University, right?
oh no, there's not one. There's been like 6 in the past 4 months.
No, that
Like,
one.
it's not one or two. It's an actual thing that's happening, like full blown. And the whole thing is like when you go back into their history, they're skewing the narrative about what race relations are and how we're supposed to be talking about this thing. They're inventing the language of race relations and just making it putrid, like that you cannot have a calm conversation about these things because these people are coming in and pretending to be
Flies
something
in the
that they're not.
buttermilk.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
I think the whole thing, or a lot of these cases, to me, point to the falseness of race.
Mhm.
I think race is an artificial construct. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not something that occurs naturally in nature. I mean, there's no biological basis for it.
Yeah.
Um,
Scientifically, race doesn't exist.
yeah, it's not a scientific thing.
However, if it wasn't a powerful construct, then those people wouldn't be constructing that narrative. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's a powerful construct, but it's one that's based on a lie. And I think what these people
Right.
reveal is the light of it, is the fact that so much of it is performance, so much of it is always an idea that people have, right? An idea that shifts quite a lot,
Mhm.
which is why in one moment someone can tell you just that you're not Black,
Yeah.
and next
Mhm.
moment they can say you are, or they can
You're
say to
too
someone
Black.
who's you're too Black.
But you know
Exactly.
what?
And the next
I've
moment they
never
can
been
say
told that
too
I'm
Black.
white.
You've never been told that you're
I've
white.
been told I'm white, and I,
I've been told I'm white too.
yeah, and I'm, at least in the physical definition of it, according to what we
Have you
define.
been in person or online, or was it like sarcastic?
I mean,
Because
in person. I mean, not literally, but like, that I act white. That
no,
that I'm
I,
acting
I
white,
don't
whatever
mean
the
like
fuck that
even
means.
acting white. Like, I'm literally half white, and
Mhm.
despite that paper bag rule, the 1 drop rule, still applies to me.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed
Right.
to claim the Blackness of my heritage, but I am also not allowed to be white.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But
Um.
in this
And
country, let's not forget where the lie was constructed, how and why, and the parameters under which it was constructed. Right.
yes, yeah, and I think that's
The
a
lie
very.
was constructed in this country
Mhm.
in order to deny things to groups of people,
Yeah,
not
and
just
to
Black
keep groups of
people.
people apart, I mean, to enforce a hierarchy that was supposed to separate people and supposed to
Right. And
deem
also to
certain
keep
people
people
worthy of bad treatment or worthy of exploitation.
have you
exploitation.
guys heard of I forgot what they're called, but it's how the Spaniards classified people according to their racial mixing,
Oh yeah, they had
like mulatto and
the Spanish
mestizo,
part
the
or
mestizaje laws and stuff like that.
yeah.
So they had a different word for every level of mixing,
Mhm.
or like the degree to which you're
Yeah.
mixed. I think it's a little bit. Um, I think that suggesting that this is just an American thing or an American problem, or something that was only done here, is kind of part of what has made this kind of toxic narrative, and
Hmm.
also part of how it keeps being exported, that what we say is the be all end all of what racism is, because it's not true. you know
In
Well,
the
I think
context,
what gets lost in a lot of this conversation is the fact that all over the world, for most of human history, maybe all of it, there have been ways in which um, difference has been maintained and enforced in different societies.
Mhm.
true.
Exploitation or oppression, whatever you want to call it, the monarch, the king ruling over people, or the nobles ruling over people, or the free men and the slaves, and so various societies, various countries, or regions have had their own versions of racism, if it's based on skin color, which sometimes it is,
Mhm.
sometimes it's not, or, in various parts of the world, or has been. And I think there's this way, and to me, a lot of it reeks of that sort of American exceptionalism, American self-centeredness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it ties to capitalism too, because I think American culture gets exported in that way. And it's often because often these conversations about occupation are about money. It's about who's getting paid for something or who's not getting paid.
Yeah.
But I think
If
there's
you
a way
look,
in which that the American version of it, which is a very specific thing, is so essentialized and universalized in the minds of Americans, and specifically a lot of African
mm-hmm.
Americans, and then begins to be imposed on other people, imposed, and that mindset gets imposed on other situations. And so, an American person is looking at what's happening in China or anywhere else
Right.
and imposing their own experience on it in a way that is just not accurate to that specific situation that they are, claiming to have knowledge
Absolutely.
But they call
about.
this to center
Yeah.
yourself in the narrative. They're
Hmm.
centering themselves in a narrative that has nothing to do with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
But I
like I
think
And
I was
willing
feel
to.
I was really responding though to the question of why this problem persists in this country.
uh, there was an article maybe 15 years ago. I think it was in National Geographic, and it was something along the lines of that race as a construct was started in the caveman days. And I could totally be misquoting this. This is also probably my interpretation of that. So
Uh,
like, don't take me at my word. I will have to look it up later on. But the way I understood it was that in the caveman days, your family, your tribe, the people that you lived with are gonna look alike from inbreeding. That's first. But when you encounter people who are different than you, the natural response is fear. So on a larger scale at this point, this is like a vestigial tale. It's the emotional vestigial tale of
oh
the
my
mind.
God.
I that's actually I kind of want to challenge that a little bit because I actually think I think there's this way that we sort of look at. I think part of what the problem we have with the discussion on population is that we sort of look at racism, especially the American
Uh,
version of it, as this sort of trans historical thing that's existed since the dawn of time, and it's not quite true. I think uh, part of human development came because there were these groups that were more insular, but they actually
uh,
interbreeding, intermarriage was something that was actually in many places encouraged because it strengthened the stock, it strengthened the gene pool. And so, and I do, and I mean, if you look at, I mean, of course, there's so many different things around the world, but if you look at the American manifestation, I mean, um, uh, anti-blackness, I mean, that uh, I mean, there were black people in the Middle Ages. There were black people all over,
mhm,
The world.
Africa, the trans-Saharan
Germany.
trade, even in Europe, all the way up to
mhm,
Scandinavia. I mean, black
Yeah.
people were there, and there were people who were in positions of power, of nobility, of respect. So I don't think that anti-blackness, for example, is something that has existed throughout history or throughout.
mhm,
It's a relatively the American conception of race, and just speak to that specific
mhm,
institution, is relatively modern, or it's very modern, very recent, given the whole history of humanity,
yeah.
and
Honestly,
very
before I left
specific
for
in a way.
China,
You know?
I believe that before I left for China, the definitions for all of these things like racism were very different to what I came back to. I was only gone
Hmm,
for like 8 years. So like when
yeah.
I came back, it was like, what's
So
this?
this,
This is not what I was hearing when I left. I think I know racism, but I guess I don't. Um, but
What were some of the
like
differences you
the,
noticed? Yeah, what did you notice that was different? Yeah.
everybody's an extremist now. There
Hmm.
is no shade of gray. There is no personal experience. It's either us or them.
Mm.
And, everybody's an enemy. You cannot have, and I don't know, people
Yeah.
don't like this when I mention it. So I'm going to say this and hopefully you guys will not be upset by it. But
Oh.
the narrative in the US is 100% white and black. There is no room for
Oh
any
yeah.
other variation. There's no room for
I
Latinos. There's no room
yeah.
for
Yeah,
DJs.
that's
That
not
strikes me so many times, especially this
yeah.
conversation of the past few months have been going on. It's so incredible to me how people always go BIPOC and then immediately after they say BIPOC, all they want to talk about is black people. All they want to do is black, black,
Yeah.
black, black, black. And
But
it's
I
like, wait,
think
what happened to the other people? What happened to the other people who are not? Yeah, it's black
Well,
or white,
like,
and everyone else is just sort of like a a side character.
yeah,
Who's
but I
but
there.
think
And
I feel that the people, well, that I feel that that narrative is coming more from the black side than the white side. And that's what really bothers me about it. I feel that the
Paris
general
disagrees.
feeling of a lot of black Americans is that if we are not visibly black, we are white enough, and our experiences with racism don't count because they're quote unquote not as bad. But that's an individual experience.
mm,
It's
I
I
like
would
mean,
say that.
it is. You got some.
do you get
Hey,
what I mean?
Well,
listen,
I just
I
think
got you,
that the
Cici.
I think that the let me tell you something.
Don't be mad.
Listen,
Listen.
listen.
Mhm.
No, I think that there are a lot of vocal jerks, right? I think that there's an agenda being pushed that a lot of black people ain't with, right?
Yeah.
I think that even the Black Lives Matters movement in a way has been hijacked by hyperbole and by
Mhm.
things that they never
Extremism.
set out. Yeah, this kind of exclusivity and this kind of extremism, the kind of like uh you know Black Lives Matters in Oakland was largely it was actually a multi-ethnic movement at its
Mhm.
core beginning,
Yeah.
and then it is visually and marketed as this black power movement,
Uh-huh.
which it actually the language of it doesn't say that at its core, right? I
Yeah.
It
think
is
that
called the movement for Black Lives, not to be,
right. I think
not to, I mean, it's
right,
pretty
but I don't
simplistic
think
clear
that
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 it's centering Black
necessarily
people, you know.
right. But then you have to say what is Black lives and who does it matter to and why did like I think the thought there behind it was a different one than what it's evolved to in its public life.
Mm.
Yes.
That's what
I
my
totally
read
agree.
on it.
What do you think is responsible for the evolution of that thought to what it is?
Anger, a lot of anger, a lot of pent up anger. I think people have pent
Hmm.
up anger without having a lot of knowledge to back. Like, I just don't think if you don't dig into what has happened, you have uh, a very surface. It kind of boils down to where you get your information and your news.
I
And
guess,
Mhm.
if you get all your what is racism today, if it comes to you in a Facebook post, it's all about like um, Becky and Karen and this one cop. Like, to me, persecuting one cop is not going to change a thing about the
Yes.
system. So,
Yeah.
we lost again is crazy talk to me. And I think those have dominated the culture because it's juicy, right? It's
Mhm.
juicy. It pulls on emotion. So news, MSNBC, CNN, whatever news program you turn to, there's no longer really about objective. It's all emotional pulling. It
Mhm.
all is. There's a sensation to everything.
one thing that I'm curious about in regards to these conversations and what Cece sort of brought up is where the line is between self promotion and social justice. Because one thing that I see is a lot of self promotion masquerading as social justice. I mean, this to me
Oh,
connects to
that's
the way
always
Mhm.
been.
connects
Yes.
to the way that people frame their rhetoric or frame their as a social justice movement that in theory includes everyone or includes BIPOCs, but ultimately it becomes me, and a lot of those me people I see happen to be Black, and so it narrows real quick. The conversation narrows real quick, but we're sort of in this moment where we're encouraged to, encourage is maybe a gentle way of saying it, encouraged to listen to Black people, center Black people, don't contradict, don't oppose, don't gaslight. And for me, I think, my question is, where is that line between self-promotion and social justice, and at what point do you go, a lot of this rhetoric
I
is
think that
self-promotion. It's not concerned at all with justice, because if you actually were concerned with justice, you would be paying attention to a bunch of other things that people don't really seem that interested in paying attention to.
I think that line is at sustainability.
Sustainability. Oh, tell me more about
I don't think that is sustainable. I
What
don't
is
think that
sustainable?
those positions are sustainable that you're talking about. And when people jump into a social justice and say, so I'll give you an example of that.
Yeah.
So the movement even to rearrange businesses and how they do business, independent of whether it's successful and independent of the conversation about what makes a fair and welcoming working environment, they just replaced the CEO with either a person of color or a person with a rhetorical program for diversity. There's not a discussion with the stakeholders. Say, go into Amazon and talk to the actual people and say, what does equality, what would help make a fair and equitable and working environment? Instead, they go, we're going to make it 60% Black and 40% white. Like there's these external. There's not a road.
And in that case, it's like 60% Black and 40% white in the front office, because in the back, in the warehouse, they're already diverse over there.
They're already
in the warehouse, it's 60% Black.
That's what I mean.
But we don't talk about the warehouse. We're not talking about the warehouse now. We're talking about who the CEO is.
I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's gonna be long lasting, and I think there's gonna be a need to replace it, just like EDI. EDI was like, everybody was like running around grabbing these jobs and being in, and now they're like emotional baggage. No, you took the EDI job, right? So I feel like one myself, right? And I was like, oh, to hell with it. This is nonsense, because this isn't really about change. This is about creating committees. So I just don't think it's sustainable.
Yeah. Cici, you're going to say something?
I feel like this actually goes back to what I was saying about like people who are not BIPOC pretending to be, for the lip service, for the right to define the narrative as a means to shut down the conversation. It's clearly is kind of what you're describing, but on a business level, on a industrial level, but like on an individual level, it's happening too. So like, I am really bothered by these conversations. My family is mixed race. We are very proudly mixed race. That's my heritage that I grew up with, that everybody's a different color and it's fucking awesome and we love it. And we have the same history, but we don't look the same. And that's amazing. But when I talk about this in certain groups or with certain people, I'm not allowed to be happy about those things. So, when people want to say or talk about like this is certain Black people who are sharing these kind of more extreme ideas, or as Rotimi was saying, that he's hearing a lot of Black people with these ideas, it's hard to criticize them, because actually we don't know if they're really Black people or people who are pretending to be Black people.
Yeah, I'm part of me wants to say, it doesn't matter if they're actually Black people or not. If they're saying some stupid shit, they're saying some stupid shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that stupidity needs to be ignored.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you a story of how this this shit works together with white supremacy. All right. When I was
Okay.
coming back to the US, this was 2 years ago, and it was not as bad as right now. I was just looking at places that I wanted to live, and I joined a Facebook group for like a community on the West Coast that I was thinking of moving to. There was a man there. He was a first generation American. I think he was a Jamaican immigrant. Um, and he was clearly mentally ill. And he was insulting everybody, going off, saying obviously crazy things, super
Mm.
offensive, disgusting, really terrible things. Um, some nice white looking guy comes in and he's all like, yeah, well, me and my girlfriend, we're like mutts and we love being mutts and we love having, this diverse background and we're just proud of it and it's great. And he changed the narrative very effectively to this white guy called his black girlfriend a bitch because a mutt is a dog is a bitch. And she had like some heritage from I can't remember, somewhere in Africa, but like she looked white. She looked white, and she did not define herself. She said that she was a mutt. That's her definition for herself. You know, the problem was not so much what he said, but that crazy shit was given a voice and
Mm.
promoted by a bunch of crazy white women who acknowledged it and said, this is a black man and he has deep feelings and we have to listen to what he said. But that was racist bullshit because they wanted that drama. They wanted to see the crazy black guy going off. They wanted the fucking stereotype. There were completely sane, rational black people in that group telling this guy to shut the fuck up and that he was being offensive. His comments were disgusting and he
Yeah.
had to stop.
Yeah.
But those people were not being listened to. Their point of view was not being promoted by these specific white women. They were specifically seeking out the most offensive, the most crazy, the most disgusting commentary and promoting that as the black voice.
Yeah. I find it, yeah, that the confusion is
Mhm.
biracial. The confusion spreads across race, right? And I think more and more, and we can blame Trumpism on it, like
No, I
this.
was already here.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not saying the man itself, but there's something that happened in the last 4 years where things became more heightened and visible. There was a
Mm.
visible, there was a face and a voice to racism, and there have been interesting things that I've seen and heard happening
Mhm.
in places that don't even make the news, right?
Yeah.
It's, but I think that the more that came out, the more people started to get entrenched in these binaries that
Mm.
that don't embrace any kind of narrative that can possibly move us forward.
Yeah. I think
Mhm.
it's interesting
Either
talking about like what's been, coming up in the past 4 years, or if you want to say that's the
10 years.
the era of, and to me, the story you just told Cici about, what happened with, that man and those women, it just makes me think about the way that certain things get highlighted.
Mhm.
And if let's say those women are, the people who control the media, whose story
Mhm.
gets told, or what story gets put on the news, or whose voice gets to be the spokesperson,
Mm-hmm.
and they would choose that man. I mean, let's say this scenario
And
is a
always,
metaphor
I
for
mean, that's
that. They
why I
choose
told the
that
story.
man.
I feel that's exactly
Yeah,
what's happening.
exactly. And then to me, that makes me begin to think, well, what is the purpose of racism? Like,
Mhm.
why was it created? It was created to separate people. It was created to make you look at somebody and say that person's not a human being. They're a black person. They're
mm-hmm.
whatever word you want to use. And similarly, or in a similar way, or on the flip side of that, that's not a human being. That's a white person, and that's what they and
Mhm.
that I know what that means to me, right?
Right,
And similarly for other groups
right,
that are defined as as not human beings anymore, but
right,
as
right,
white or as
Yeah.
right,
black or as Latino, whatever,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
and what that does is it keeps people apart.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
you can't go and join up with that black person and see yourself being in the same boat as them and turning your eyes, because what it was created to do, it was created to prop up an economic system, prop up slavery, or a
Hmm.
system that needed slavery, needed exploited labor in
Yeah.
order to run, right? So you don't want the poor white people to get together with the black people. You don't want the Native Americans to get together. You don't want the Latinos to get
You
together.
don't want the house Negro. That's the famous
Hmm.
African American
Yeah,
Negro,
yeah.
right? You don't want the house Negro to get with the field Negro.
Exactly. And
And
that ripples out beyond black
yeah.
people to all the groups, right? All the groups who are underneath, because
Hmm.
who's benefiting from this system the most?
Hmm.
It ain't the people down on the ground, whatever their color is. It's the people who are living in the fucking plantation house.
Right.
It's the person, it's
Yeah.
the master and the
And then
missive,
in the
you
hood,
know?
you call that caught up.
Yeah,
That means
exactly.
you caught up.
Yeah.
You
And
all up in it, talking about you fighting it, yet you
yeah,
all up in it.
exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think like there is this I really do think, and maybe it's tinfoil hat of me, but I don't even think it's like a conspiracy theory. I think it's clear. I mean, I think there are certain voices, certain narratives, certain perspectives that are encouraged in the press. They sell papers, if at the very basis, and also they reinforce the status quo. If you tell me that the reason why I'm exploited at work is because my white coworker, I don't know, touch my hair. Which, okay, that's not the greatest thing in the world. But now my eyes are not on the boss who's, underpaying me. It's on my
Hmm.
coworker and how we need to go into an anti-racism
Oh yeah.
section so that they can deal with the inner virus that makes them want to touch my hair.
You
Mhm.
know,
And sorry, touching my hair is not quite the same problem to me as getting underpaid. But now I'm
Yeah.
not thinking about that. I'm thinking about Becky touching my
yes.
hair.
You know,
And
earlier, I don't
yeah,
think.
and sorry, go
Sorry.
on, Cici. Like, yeah, I said
Uh,
enough.
earlier, I was talking about like this old, caveman and whatever. I don't think I made my point clearly, but I want to do it now. So, like, the idea behind this concept, which who knows if it's true or not, or how much is accurate, but like it was that when you meet an unknown, you are going to be afraid, and to protect yourself, you essentially have to dehumanize them and be able to flip that sociopath switch in your head, which we all have. That's what dehumanization is, literally the denial of humanity to other people. We all have that, and we can all do it. It just depends on what our particular triggers are. Uh, so, if you go back to that way back caveman days, if you are fighting to survive, that means that if you hit that switch, you're going to be able to kill all those people who are going to prevent you from staying alive. And that's like basically what tribalism is. And I feel like that's what has become of our society. We've become super, huge tribes, but we are absolutely tribalist in the way that we confront issues and deal with things. So, like, have either of you guys ever actually met like a person, a child of whatever age, who has lived in a completely homogenous society and had no contact with anybody of another race?
I have.
Well, I mean, I
I
wouldn't even say
definitely have
I've
in
been
terms
that child. I mean, I wouldn't say absolutely no contact because I would watch people on TV,
Uh-huh.
but so maybe that's not
of
the
my
same thing.
own
But
child.
I grew up in Nigeria where,
Uh-huh.
99% of people are black and, you
So,
know,
like, so you would say that you saw on TV, you were able to access foreign cultures, but what happened when you had to face the dichotomy between what you saw on TV and the reality of those foreign people?
ooh, well, I could say
The,
a lot of things. I mean, one of the things, and this is, I was going to kind of um, say this in response to the caveman thing, is one
Mhm.
of the things that I feel, I felt when I first saw a white person or a person of a different race was fascination.
Mhm.
It wasn't fear, and I
Mhm.
think fear is connected to that scarcity, right? Like you have to fight somebody for resources, so you're scared they might be an enemy. But if you're not, and that I'm going to connect that a little bit to what's going on in the world or in this country with how people are so
Mhm.
squeezed economically that's part of how. But when I first saw people of a different race, I mean, fascination. Someone has yellow hair. I wanted to touch it. I wanted to look at it. I wanted to see what it looked like. It's like that. That to
But
me,
touching their hair is racist.
But so here's a difference.
exactly. Or is it? Or is it?
Well,
Like
that's the point.
yeah.
I think that's you
Mhm.
came from Nigeria, where you're surrounded by black people.
Yeah.
And then my son, however, came to San Francisco from Arkansas, where
Mhm.
there's a severe um, separation in communities. It's a segregated culture in some ways. In a lot of ways, it is. And I'm not saying that as historical, in the historical sense that, people were forced. People have largely chosen to remain in their historical communities, and the town has grown. So those communities are sort of growing towards each other. And in that, there was it's the South, so there's still a lot of anti-black sentiment, right? That gets picked up by adults and passed on to children. So even though no one directly said to my son, stay away from white people, I do remember a time when he was maybe 5, and he walked in the back room of this fish fry place where all these good old boys were. And my father kind of panicked and grabbed him because they were like, that's not where the black people go. So when my son came to San Francisco and I introduced him to my friend Johannes, who has huge blonde hair and blue eyes and a big smile, and Johannes came running toward him, my son went, ah, right?
Yeah.
And Johannes was like, he's scared of white people. And I was like, yeah, he just came from Arkansas. Like,
Yeah.
within 2 seconds and a couple cookies and a hot chocolate later, all is good. And so I think to me that says that that's taught. That fear is a learned thing, because there's always the little babies. We always talk about this, and it's true. If you put a black and white child 2 years old in a room together, they don't run from each other. They play. They recognize that we both have fat legs that are wobbling. We can't walk on. We both like this toy. They might fight over the toy, but that's a recognition that they both like the same toy. They're in communion with each other. They're not automatically withdrawn and operating from some kind of innate, I'm white and you're not kind of thing, or you got nappy hair and mine's straight or whatever.
But I don't think it has to be a white or black or anything. This could also be like a regional thing or a city thing, because I think that is tribalism, that you are taught that by your family, you're taught that by your community. So like
maybe by your own experience sometimes.
Yeah, you can just look outside. You can look here at American culture and everybody is terrified all the time. And that is all that you see on TV all the time. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. You can't trust them. They have a different religion. They have a different culture. They're a different color. They don't believe in this. They do believe in that. They hate babies. They eat children. They eat babies. I have 2 younger brothers. They were raised like me. They were raised in the same situation as I was. They had the same friends as me. We had the exact same experience growing up, except, I was a girl. And both of my brothers have, I don't know, I don't want to say full-blown white supremacists, but they've bought into this shit. I don't know how. And I don't think that it started off as being like the way that they speak now. Because right now, my younger brother sent a message to my cousin telling her that she had to be terrified if Biden became president because he was going to make it legal for her children to be raped. And then she was terrified by the message that he was sending her. Sent me a message because she knows that I love politics, asking me what's really, don't laugh. She was terrified.
I would be terrified too.
Terrifying stuff, yeah.
And he literally convinced her that, and she's a smart girl. She's a very good woman. And he convinced her that, they had legalized pedophilia in California. My brother is a smart man. He was not this dumb, and I don't know what happened to him, but he went from being somebody who went to university, had the reasoning skills to understand context, to being he was a very liberal, socially liberal person, to telling her like um all these Middle Easterners had invaded Europe and they had turned it into a shithole. And, you know, the US was going to become socialist. And then we were all going to be like raping and eating children. And like, she was just totally freaked out. She had no idea what was going on. She was like, what's happening? Like, what? He convinced her that it was the end of the world. And
Yeah.
both of my brothers have bought into this mindset. My brother, that brother specifically, he is identifiably black. Anybody that looks at him will see a light-skinned black man. And here he is talking shit about Middle Easterners are destroying Europe and Africans are destroying Europe and foreigners are going to come into our country and destroy it.
Wow.
And anybody can
Hmm.
be infected with this extremism. And I think it is intentional. I think it is used as a distraction. And I think that the whole point of it is money. I think it's 100% corporate greed. And if we can convince people that their enemies are each other, they're not fighting
Corporate.
the real enemy, which is wage slavery, because that's what we have right now.
Well, I feel
Yes,
like
I'm with
the convincing of your cousin was interesting because I found myself, when you look at social media a lot, and I found myself going, oh my God, there's like 5 articles on this, right? And then for a second you think, could there be any truth to this? And then you go, then you realize, no, it's absolutely ridiculous. No, they're not legalizing pedophilia. But he probably had access to backup documentation. It's kind of amazing the stuff that I found, because I try to, I watch Fox News. I try to understand. A lot of that has to do with you, wrote to me, but I try to.
I did not make you watch Fox News.
No, but I mean, like when we were working on the first mine, when we were working on walls, and we're working on like part of our part of what we wanted to bring to the table was trying to understand the entire country and not lump people into extreme camps. And so I so I go into a lot of different chat rooms or whatever they call them now, like spaces. Candace Owens space is particularly fun sometimes.
Oh no.
But like going, I just want to see who people are, and I think there are a lot of fake black people on there. But I just want to see what is it that like people pretend to be black. Be like, you ain't black, I can tell. But just like, the amount of legitimate language that gets employed, and the amount of the amount of journals that lack integrity, that you can pull things from to convince people of certain things.
And I got to add to that. Yeah, and I got to add to that even there's this great book called Hate Inc. It's by Matt Taibbi. He used to be a writer for the Rolling Stone. Really great journalist. I think he's really great, and he writes about like the news media and how that is like the current zeitgeist. It's like it's not about like, there used to be a time when the news was trying to like speak to everyone, the middle of America, and now you have to sort of find your niche, your tribe, and like get them up, right? So even the New York Times, even these, newspapers that are, alleged, supposedly the newspaper of record, the neutral, they have their camps. And looking at this election that just happened, and it really. So I got off social media. I mean, I still have an account, but I don't really go on there anymore because I was noticing the same thing as Idris, you just said. Like I scroll through my feed and suddenly I'm believing the sky is falling, and I'm mad at people, and now I'm seeing white people instead of like human beings I know and I love, or the complicated, or and so I was like, I got to step away from this shit. Like this is not the real world. This is something else. And then looking at the election, I have to say, I think Trump is awful and terrible. I think many of the reasons that people talk about why he's awful and terrible in the news are not actually the reasons why he's really awful and terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of those narratives that you see even in the New York Times, they blow shit. They take something he says and they like decode it. So they go, he said this, but what he really meant was it was really a racist dog whistle. It was really a signal, a secret signal. And
they do that on MSNBC.
And I go like with her, and I go. Let me just go look at the. Even if you just read the article, you even notice. Oh wait, they're kind of like it's not really like definite words. They're kind of saying he implied this. You go look at the quote, and you go, okay. I mean,
or CNN does that a lot.
He didn't really say that. I mean, there's 10 other fucked up things going on here, but this thing they said he didn't really say that. And so I see it happening not just among the Fox News crowd, but now among the CNN, MSNBC.
CNN is terrible with that.
Yeah, CNN, yes, totally.
And I'll tell you what New York Times does is they don't do it in the body always. Like if you read the article, the body of the article might actually have some column objective facts, but the headline will guide you as to how you're supposed to color those facts. And exactly.
And so it's the camp thing and the extremism and the fact that like I can understand how somebody, because I see my friends, I see educated people and they have the same. I mean, the whole Trump derangement syndrome. It's a two-sided thing. It ain't just the Trumpers. It's the liberals who like every day is like, what did he do today? What did he do today? Oh my God, this is what he did today.
And calling you up, trying to scream about it like you give a shit.
And you're like, guys, they're just ginning you up. I mean, look.
This is me, by the way.
Shut up, call me about Trump. You crazy.
You know what though? I can say, you know, right now with this whole election, everybody's like writing all these narratives like, oh, we were betrayed by the Latinos. I'm gonna tell you exactly.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that narrative. That's really, they do.
There's no monolith you can count on.
You know, there are so many different kinds of Latinos. We don't even speak the same language. Like half of us are indigenous peoples from like 50 different tribes. Like others of us are like black, yellow, you know, some of us are super racist Germans. Like literally there's all kinds of Latinos.
Everybody's not Mexican.
This is so great. I wish we could give
I know we're
2 hours. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
I think it's a pretty niche podcast, but I hope it becomes popular for other people or with other people. So basically, the theme is sex, except that it's from the perspective of women who have autism, and we're basically invisible. People don't talk about us. Everybody's all like autistic people, and they're talking about white men who are super nerdy. Or children, and especially autism moms, which is a group of parents who believe that children with autism basically should never have to mature or develop skills of any kind, because, you know, it's mean to force children with autism to experience things because it might trigger them to have like an episode or something like that. And pretty much all of the women who participate in this blog, and there's about 5 or 6 different women, and they kind of rotate them in depending on the topic. They all have autism or some other disability of some kind, maybe ADHD or bipolar disorder or something along those lines. So it's a very neurodiverse group. It's also not just women. We have a man, a trans man. Basically, we wanted to have female-bodied people or former female-bodied people to speak to that experience as a person growing in a hypersexualized environment who does not always understand what's happening around them. So far, we've covered a lot of really, I would say, sometimes controversial topics. For example, the trans experience. My friend, when I met him, he was a lesbian, and over 10, 12 years now, he has become a man. And we talked about like his experience going from realizing who he really was, and changing how he referred to himself. And he's much more open, I think, partially because of autism, than for maybe some other people would be to describing his experience. A lot of people would shut down that kind of conversation and call it triggering.
Hmm.
We've also discussed rape and rape culture. Another part of the theme of the topic is that we discuss manga because we're nerds, and the name of it, Rotten Girls, it comes from a Chinese word that's called funyu, which is referring to women who like to read a lot of fetishist porn. So, we thought that comic book porn was a great jumping off point to discuss way more serious topics in like a very lighthearted manner. There are a lot of podcasts that talk about sex and get really graphic and describing like sexual positions where female sexuality becomes male entertainment. And this is not. This is like focused on humanist education and psychology and who we are, how we develop ourselves as people, how we develop our sexuality, how we define ourselves, and also talking about porn. yeah, it's called The Rotten Girl's Guide to Sexual Tropes.
Right.
Yeah, so The Rotten Girl
Great
is
name.
Thank you. The Rotten Girls is specifically from Chinese, because in Chinese it's funyu, which means it's referring to women who like to read comic book porn, specifically gay porn.
Yes. Where can folks listen to it? If they want to listen to the podcast, where can they listen or subscribe?
It's on Spotify. So if you want to search for Rotten Girls Guide, you will find it. The upcoming topics that we're going to deal with have to do with body dysmorphia and body image, and how we develop body image in a sexist society. And these are women from several different countries, by the way. We're also going to discuss pedophilia in the media and how it's misrepresented, and also how it's how common it is and how acceptable it is. So the topics are pretty extreme, and we filter them through porn.
Hey, why
not?
Because they're depressing. So you got to make it light enough to be tolerable.
That's great. I can't wait to start rolling the episodes.
I hope so.
Yeah, because I'm at home all day. I need stimulation. I need
content.
Yeah, I need content. It's great.
These times, the times like these. Thank you for joining us for this edition of So Soul San Francisco, Internationally Black. Join us next time on Saturday, December 18th, when we will be going to another exciting location and having another scintillating conversation. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay beautiful. Goodbye.